Are we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not. Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Better Than Not podcast. Today's episode features the host of the very popular Daily Dose of Wisdom podcast and YouTube channel, Brandon McGuire. We talk about C.S. Lewis, Dr. John Lennox, Dr. Hugh Ross, Dr. Stephen C. Meyer, and their work and how it fits together and putting, shall we say, evidence of what this whole God thing is about. I hope you'll join us. I think you'll find it very interesting and worth your time. Hi there, and welcome to Better Than Not, the podcast that aims to capture shifting perspectives and thought-provoking ideas in conversation, which is based loosely on my series, A Changing Frame of Reference, which you can read on the Substack series, and I hope you will, as it might give you some insight into what this podcast is all about. I'm your host, Doug Gardam, and today I'm very excited and pleased to welcome Brandon McGuire. Brandon, how are you?
Doing great. Happy to be here.
I'm looking forward to this conversation in a big way. Brandon is the host of the popular podcast and YouTube channel called A Daily Dose of Wisdom. You may have heard about it. You may have even read about it in my Substack series, as I have actually talked a little bit about him, talking to his guests and his perspectives on life. Brandon is also a new father, which, to say the least, you're going to find he's very excited about, as as most of us are when we become fathers. His story is interesting, and I'm looking forward to doing that. So we'll go on a lot of different paths today. But Brandon, how is fatherhood treating you?
It's honestly a little bit of everything. It's less sleep, it's more sacrifice, it's more, management, but it's already 100% worth it. It's amazing. And there's a special, I remember talking to one of my friends about how, and this is probably such an obvious comment, but I was like, it's crazy because this is the only relationship I've ever experienced where there wasn't a process of getting to know that person, a process of basically falling in love. It's literally like in the hospital, I just felt like God downloaded love into my heart, literally within a few seconds. And you're just holding him and it's like, I'm all in. I would die for you. And where else does that come from? So actually, it's actually, not to make everything an argument for God, but I was like, wow, there's a powerful, emotional, psychological, spiritual reality of love that is literally just downloaded into your heart when you hold your baby for the first time. And we didn't have to go on a first date or anything. It was all in. So it was awesome.
It's kind of amazing when that happens, because it's like you can read about it, you can do all these kind of experiential things to kind of get ready. But when it happens, the feeling is just, it's instantaneous. It's hard to describe if you haven't actually experienced it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Because I was going to say, I've recently become a grandfather, and one of the biggest things that I noticed with it, because it's different than having like your own kids, but in a way is watching our daughter instantaneously become a mother. Like that, it was kind of a crazy thing to see and experience and be part of. So I'm excited for you, and I'm hoping that it all goes super well, which it sounds like it's going really good. Other than the sleep depravity is something that's hard to get used to.
Yeah, it is. Well, even within that, there's an answered prayer, actually, because basically for the first month, we didn't know what to compare our experience to, because you're not really inside of the house of all of your friends who have had kids. So you just assume, wow, I guess behind closed doors, everyone must be going through the same thing that we're going through. It turns out that he actually had a pretty severe allergy where he was allergic to the milk that he was drinking. So it was kind of like he was getting poisoned almost, where every
Oh,
meal he would be like, great, I'm full, but I'm also miserable. And so it took us a while and started going to, the pediatric appointments and everything. And they figured out that was the problem. So we switched to this special
wow.
hypoallergenic formula. And within 4 hours, he was like a different baby. So,
Amazing.
even that is an answer to prayer within it, where it's like, well, this is great, but we got to figure something out, man. Eventually we need to sleep.
Prayers are a big part of this whole thing. It's always interesting when I think of this as far as the birth process, because we'll be talking, like, to me, a big part of our discussion will probably be around science and demonstration, shall we say, of the spiritual or God and that type of thing. And when you see the birth of a new living human being, and you start to think, like, from the science standpoint, like, you go like, well, everything that we're made of comes out of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're conceived, like, as a human being, the instant we're conceived, there's something that comes into us that pulls all that together and literally grows it. We're born after 9 months, and then we live a life, and then we die, and that goes away. And as a science perspective, it almost sounds cold to the emotional feeling that you feel bringing a new human being into life. And it makes me astonishing. We still don't know what that spirit, that thing is. Like, it's just amazing to me when you see it in your real lives and you're connected to it.
Absolutely. And even at a scientific level, there's so many things that we don't yet
Oh,
understand about how any of it works.
yes.
And but your point is even separate, which is the emotional and spiritual, like the idea of that we are ensouled. We're ensouled
Yes.
creatures.
Good
And so
word.
I totally agree with that, obviously. But I've been trying to find the right guest to have on the Daily Dose of Wisdom podcast. Is it I guess it would be like obviously a biologist, but what am I trying to say? Like a microbiologist. And I
Yes.
want to ask about cellular replication,
Yep.
because we now know that cells are cities. Basically, there's hundreds of intricate parts that move together, and there's basically like cars that move things to different parts, and there's a cell is so much more complicated than we
Oh,
thought that it was 100 years ago. And my question is, this is going to sound so silly if someone actually is a microbiologist, like, there's an answer to this, but maybe it's just me. But riddle me this: if you have a cell here, okay, if you can see this,
yeah. Yeah.
and if you look at the day one, the formation of a human being, or for that matter, any biological life form,
Yep.
you have that cell, it splits in half and it turns into two cells, and then four, and then et cetera, right?
Yep.
And my question is, how do, because it's not just a ball, it's not just a circle that turns into two circles, it's a city that turns into two cities.
Mm-hmm.
And,
An infinite city.
exactly. So how does
I
all
don't
of
know.
that get duplicated? In a sense, it's divided, but how do you, in other words, do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How
Oh,
do
I'm right on. Yeah.
you get twice as many of everything without adding anything in, and it happens instantaneously? I don't understand. So anyway, this is just one of those things that's basically miraculous in nature. I'm sure that there
Absolutely.
is an explanation, but it's pretty profound.
Well, to me, I was going to say, you had Stephen C. Meyer as a guest, so you met him.
Yes. Yes.
And I read his book, Darwin's Doubt, and parts of that book go deeply into part of what you're describing, right? This is why I struggle, Brandon, when I hear this, like, we're into this new artificial intelligence or AI world, and then I hear this word sentience thrown out, that eventually it's going to become that. And I kind of go like, but wait a second. We don't know how a single atom, the first atom on the periodic table, hydrogen, we can't create one of those. And you're telling me now that suddenly we're going to go and create a sentient being with AI? Like, it just seems like an infinite leap of, like, this is what's going to happen. And it's exactly
Exactly.
to your point. Exactly to your point. Like you have these, I like how you describe the cities, but you have these infinite cities that, and I think we have a real struggle with understanding infinity. I think that's a big part. And that's why I've heard this kind of statement where we're spiritual beings having a human experience versus
Hmm.
human beings having a spiritual experience.
Yep.
And that becomes to me very succinct and alive when you start to begin to understand that thing. Because I think the infinity that's contained in an atom or a cell, like you mentioned, is kind of embodying that spirit part that, like, to your point, we seem to know almost nothing about. Like it's stunning to me. And maybe we
Yeah.
got caught on this Darwin evolutionary train, like you said, when Darwin came up with that theory, we basically thought a cell was a glob, right? A blob.
Hmm.
We
Yep.
had no idea what's there. And
Yep.
to base the rest of our kind of existence or our whole science perspective on that flawed thinking
Yeah.
is almost preposterous in many ways when you start to pull it together, right?
It is preposterous even within Darwin's actual theory, but something else preposterous has happened somewhere along the way, and that is that people there have actually been questionnaires that have shown this to be true. 2/3 of Americans believe that life has been created in the lab. That is not true.
I'm with you. Yes,
We
absolutely.
haven't we
Yes.
haven't
No.
created life in the lab. And so what has happened from my perspective is that based on the primordial soup narrative, it's a mythology story. It's a
Yes.
narrative, but people believe that Darwin scientifically proved or explained or gave evidence for that humans came from this primordial soup. That is absolutely
No.
incorrect. There,
Right.
Darwin
Absolutely.
didn't even touch on the origin of life. The origin of
That's
life is a huge topic in science that is still unanswered, and because it's unanswered, we need to rip out all of these pages from every textbook that we're given in school, from kindergarten all the way up to the graduate level, that give us a mythological narrative about where humans came from that is not scientifically supported. That's one of
it.
the big sleight of hands is
Yes.
Darwin, therefore primordial soup true, not so fast.
You just said something that I've found kind of amazing is the title of the book, which he doesn't really tell us what that is. And yet it's the title of the book.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I just find I haven't heard very many people say what you just said, in that, like, he doesn't talk about the origin of species, yet it's the title of the book. I just
Yeah,
find
and
it.
your average person again just has the I mean at a symbolic level it's so profound because we can all envision the story, and basically what happens is your mind just connects the dots, assuming that all the dots are there to be connected from
Yes.
the primordial soup all the way to modern man. But in fact that is not the case. There's a massive gap. Speaking of God of the gaps, there's a huge gap
Yes.
from non-life to life that has not been answered. And if you talk to people who are at the highest level of this question, like James Tour, he'll tell you that that gap is getting bigger every single day. The goalposts are moving farther away as we learn more, that time is not working in our advantage. Time is working against us, because if he speaks as a chemist, and he says it is a race against the clock to get these things done in the lab as quickly as you possibly can before they decay, because everything is going to entropy, everything is going to
Yes.
decay. And so you have to apply so much intelligent design to even get close to doing some of the pieces that would be required for life. And even with all of the brilliance of modern
Mm-hmm.
science and all of the money dedicated to answering this question, we're still, not only are we still a far
Oh boy.
shot from achieving this, the goalpost is moving further away from us as we learn more about what's actually would be required to get life out of non-life.
Yeah, I was going to say you said that very well, because to me that is really the point. It's one of the things that I was kind of amazed by is it really is what started my series, A Changing Frame of Reference, because I spent my background's engineering and science world, all that kind of thing was there for a long time. And I started to realize it was actually reading about the Cambrian explosion, where like 500 million years ago, this animal life came into here that we never have found pre-fossils for. Like there was almost everything it came from this to become this. And it was found out here, and I'm from British Columbia in Canada, and they found this. Apparently, Darwin even knew about this, and he said, "Well, we just haven't found them yet. Well, we're still looking for them." But it's like brachiopods and trilobites, that these animals that we know about. And then another guest that you had on took that even further, Dr. Hugh Ross, because he talks about the universe being created for us, which that's the one. Why is the universe that's a beautiful, wonderful book. If people haven't read that, it'll open your eyes. But what I was shocked by when I pulled that book open, I opened it on his explanation of the Cambrian explosion and the decomposition of those animals, providing the petroleum that we need for our civilization today. Like if that doesn't fit together and tell you something, like that's amazing to me. So it's like when you say the goalposts are moving farther away for us understanding it, I don't know whether Einstein said this or not, Brandon, but it was like, I'm learning more and more about less and less until I'll know everything about nothing. That's kind of like, it seems what's kind of happening. And that's why when we hear this idea that AI is going to become sentient, I'm going like, you're missing. It's the same kind of argument that you're talking about with evolution, right? This gap between creating life and how life gets created. It's just gigantic to me. It's very, very, I really want to go down this path a little bit further, but I want to step back a little bit because you have a very popular podcast, and I'm really interested in what got you started in all this and the topic, because the timing is unbelievable to me, and fitting with a book that we both been kind of talking about. And this is Justin Brierley's new book about the surprising resurgence of belief. That's the book, man. And connecting that with how did it start for you with your podcast and YouTube channel, as far as talking about these? Obviously, you're very passionate about them, and the belief is like undeniable. But how did it start for you?
I've looked and I found that there's no one like Jesus.
Oh, yes. Okay.
At the simplest level. And so then it becomes something that you want to share, like anything. If you watch an amazing movie, you want to share it. If you have an amazing friend, you want your other friend to meet that friend. You got to meet so-and-so. They're so great. It's really that simple.
Okay.
Jesus is the center of reality. Jesus has revealed to us the image of the invisible God. Jesus has solved my biggest problem, which is that I am a contributor to the problem of evil myself. I am a morally flawed person, and there is no other name under heaven by which I can be saved. There is no person or character in any other religion that offers me atonement, that has taken my place, that has taken a bullet for me, offered me his innocence, taken my guilt, and then said, now go and talk about what it feels like to be fully forgiven and share the love that I have now deposited in you through my Holy Spirit, which is a deposit for your future inheritance. So there is so much depth and richness inside of the Christian story, not as a useful delusion. A story that is just filled with utility, but not actually true, is ultimately meaningless. The Christian story reaches to the depths of the human problem, and it also is true. It is evidence-based. It took place in history. As Jordan Peterson once marveled and was brought to tears upon reflecting on, it is the cross of Christ is where the literary world and the real world
Oh,
meet. It is the merger of mythology and archetype and and his obsession in the Jungian sense, but then an actual problem to the deepest human problem, which is evil, which is the fact, why is the world the way that it is? Why are our children dying of cancer? Every argument that you could use to say God must not exist because of this at a moral level once is indicating to you that something is wrong, and your ability to detect wrong is in and of itself something to think about. But then also, where else is there a solution to evil? What is, as John Lennox once said, what is Christ doing on the cross? Why is God entering into suffering? The
oh,
answer to that question will really bake your noodle, because at the place where the shadow of the cross rests on an empty tomb, I believe is where all questions can be answered. And if it isn't actually true, not just a useful solution, if it's not actually true that the only perfect one really did enter in, really did write himself into the story like Shakespeare writing himself into Hamlet, actually did really solve the problem, defeat death, who is our greatest enemy, and then
yes.
offer us real hope, real justice, and real eternal life. If that's not true, but just a comforting thought, then ultimately we're dead in our sin, and ultimately the entire universe is going to end at zero in a heat death in the relatively near future. But if Christ really did die and really did rise, then we actually have immediately meaning,
Hmm.
hope, purpose, destiny. He gives us joy. He gives us abundant life. And so that's my answer to the question is I'm all in on Jesus, because I can't see anything that captures my heart like this strong hero giving himself up for sinful, depraved humanity.
Yes.
The strong serving the weak, the ultimate sacrifice. It's reflected in every movie. It's reflected in every story. All the best-selling books have this idea
This,
inside of them because it is our story. We are the damsel in distress. He is our hero. It's so deeply ingrained in who we are as a species because it is actually our true reality. As C.S. Lewis said, the myth became real.
yes.
Christ is the true myth. God put on flesh and dwelt among us. I'm kind of preaching here, but you got me fired up when you asked this question.
That's
So this
okay.
is the thing. This is the thing is I
Yes.
have a fire in my belly because if it's not if I didn't have Jesus, I don't have anything. If I don't have Jesus, I'm dead in my sin. If I don't have Jesus, I don't have a reason for living. All that I have is
Absolutely.
it's temporary happiness.
Yes. Yes.
It's life is a melting ice cream cone, and its purpose is to enjoy it before it melts. That's such a sad view of the human
Wow.
experience.
Okay. Yes, it is. I was going to say because to your point, and I think this is a great one, is that all else doesn't lead to hope. That's the part that I find so, like Paul said, that faith, love, and hope. Love is the most important. I find it just it's stunningly inaccurate in so many ways. And this is to me kind of the question I'd asked a while ago: is how did science get detached from God? Because if you go and start to look at it, it demonstrates God, not separates God. And I find it very, I've written a lot about this because, and you've kind of, I'll say, very much made an example of this in putting that together, is that it's very real. And what we started with our questions around the spiritual part, you answered that with Jesus, right? That's the whole, like it's like the Old Testament is about flesh and blood and dealing with evil. The New Testament is about the spiritual warfare of evil. And Jesus brought that by with the cross, right? And it's like, it's funny you mentioned this because recently I've become extremely fascinated with Paul in
Mm-hmm.
his writing in the New Testament. In fact, I often am really surprised that in the great literature, you already connected literature with the Spirit, which is great. Why is Paul not included in the great literary figures of when we talk about them, right? Because I mean, he wrote half the New Testament. But one of the things in Galatians that was I found just profound was when he talked about in 2:16 about you're justified through faith in Christ,
Mm.
not through works of the law. And that what you've just went through in telling is almost exactly that statement in example. Like it's kind of amazing, Brendan, when you kind of put that together to me. Like How did we
Yeah,
miss
no,
this?
exactly. And I think it's important for people to understand that the way that God has revealed truth to us is in a multifaceted manner. There
Oh,
are
yes.
hundreds and hundreds of different threads that work together to create the full tapestry of what is true, the full tapestry of who God is, the full tapestry of basically picture the face of Christ being formed by a thousand thread tapestry. And a lot of times what these threads are lines of evidence that reveal the truth.
Yep.
And so you touched on the philosophical, the literary, the experiential, the scientific. Each of these things are broad categories that have inside of them so many different lines of evidence revealing the truth. And so that's what I think. And you brought up Paul. It's so funny because you got to remember Paul was a Christian killer. That's the
This
craziest thing.
it's one of the most amazing transformations in history to me. That's not
Yeah.
I've not felt it's been well recognized, because he was not a disciple originally, and to your point, he was greatly, like, he was like the leading intellectual of the law, right? As far as the works of man, like
Yep.
Galileo, I think, was his
Yeah. Is it Gamaliel or Gamaliel?
yes.
Whoever that guy. However you say that.
That's the guy. That's the man. And he was like his protege. Paul was his protege, right? And he knew all of it. And it's like he goes on this road to Damascus, and after Christ has been crucified, he sees him, and he suddenly just changed. And it's like
Right.
it's enormously profound what he gave to the world in, like I said, the 13, 14 books that he wrote in the New Testament. That sometimes when we go down this road of, I'll say, Christian, I feel like people haven't read the New Testament because they're still in the Old Testament, if you know what I mean.
Yes. And I want to say as well that Paul's conversion is also a type. It's also a one pattern of evidence that has been repeated millions of times, and it's the evidence of a transformed life. This is something
Yes.
that I think is not talked about often enough. Christians are not just saying, I was raised Christian, therefore I'm Christian. Christians are saying, real Christians are saying, what we're
Yes.
claiming is, I have been changed by Jesus.
I like that.
It's a far more provocative,
Yes, it is.
dramatic thing that is being claimed by Christians. It's not just, like I said, my family's Christian, I'm Christian, or I grew up in this. I mean, there is a version of that, but I don't think that is real, true spirituality. I don't think that is a real Christian necessarily. Maybe at somewhere along the way, maybe you, like me, were 6 years old the first time that you understood the gospel. I was having literally murderous thoughts about my mom. And
Okay.
I had anger in my heart toward my mom, and I
Right.
was so upset. I was so angry, and I came across telling of the story of Pilgrim's Progress, and there's a portion in Pilgrim's Progress where he has this huge backpack that he's carrying around, this massive load, this weight, and he comes to the cross and he lays it down, and it was like a children's, like a cartoon version, and Simon and Garfunkel played in the background, and the colors turn pastel, and the load is placed at the foot of the cross, and he experiences relief and release. And I'm watching this as a 6-year-old,
Oh, wow.
and I go, there's something about this that's, for some reason, I'm getting convicted. I didn't know what the word conviction meant,
Right. Yep.
but I'm thinking about me right now, and I'm thinking about this anger I'm holding in my heart that is kind of like a burden. It's kind of heavy. It's kind of like a giant backpack of
Yep.
a burden that I'm carrying with this anger. This is very odd, and I'm basically getting convicted by the Holy Spirit, and I'm basically realizing that if I could offload this burden to the feet of the cross, to the feet of Jesus, and experience relief, forgiveness at the most basic level, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And so there's layers and layers that have unfolded as I've understood more and more who Jesus is, what ultimate reality is. But even for me, if that's when I was saved,
Yes. Yeah. Wow.
which it might have been when I was 6, it might have been when I was 19. I always say, because I deconstructed for 2 years and really had to go through this whole thing. So who knows? I don't know which one it was what, but I do know that at that point, I even then had a before and after. I once was, but now I'm. Uh,
Yes.
and I think that Paul is a very dramatic example of that. But I think that again, Paul is a type. Paul is a pattern of evidence. Paul's type of evidence for Jesus being who he said he was is a pattern of evidence that has been repeated millions of times.
Yeah. I really liked how you put that, Brandon, because and I can actually relate to it, because I was raised in the Anglican church and we went just as a family, and we went to church. That's just what we did, right? I'll say, I started to understand. I knew what the Bible was. I've kind of always believed in God type of thing, but I got very chased by the idea of this hypocrisy, like that you see demonstrated over and over again. You're here doing this, and then you go out and do the opposite. And I'm seeing this from adults, and it really turned me off. So for many years, I really struggled with that. I just kind of, I'll say, I almost left the church. I've never been able to go. I call it. I'm not courageous enough to be an atheist. I just can't do that because I just can't believe that. But the God part. But believe it or not, when I saw the depiction dramatized of the Abraham story, it was actually in the Bible series that Mark Burnett and Romadoni put together. It was on the History Channel. You'll laugh at this, but it was profound to me, because I often will watch this type of thing while I'm working out. And they did the Abraham story, and he's been told by God. I mean, you know the story. I'm just kind of going through this for people listening, but he's been told by God he's going to have descendants in as many stars that are in the sky, and yet his wife Sarah is barren. And so she tells him that, and she says, well, for you, this is such a human thing to do, right? This is our human solution. Well, if you're going to have that many descendants, I have to allow you to go to my slave girl to have descendants, right? Which he goes in and does. And apparently, in context at the time, that was an allowable thing to have an heir. Now he's broken his faith in God by doing this, and I'm watching this. And for the first time, this is a crazy story. This is not this is about us. This is who we do. This is our failures. This is what we do wrong, right? We come up with our own. And that was a very significant shift in how I actually even thought about the Bible and God, because it was such, to me, a lesson. And I kind of thought that he gave Abraham a second chance when he said, after Isaac had been died, and saying, you need to sacrifice your son. And Abraham went up and was all about to do it. And I thought, he got a second chance to prove and demonstrate his faith in the Lord. I thought it was an amazing story. And since that, so much stuff has happened that exactly fits to how you explained about, I was born in a Christian family, but the Paul story about being transformed, it's happened millions and millions of times, because it's actually a human experience that actually shifts your thinking, right?
Yes, exactly. And it raises the question, how many people do you have to write off as actually crazy before you're willing to listen to the experiences and the stories that these people have actually had? And I just think that it's, and again, there's obviously, I don't think that all religions are different, shades of gray, are different variations of the same thing. So in order to be intellectually consistent, have to say that I do think that there's large swaths of people who are wrong about their conclusions about who God is. But I think that as I've looked more into the question of comparative religion, I've found that the claim that is made in different ways, but within the different religions of the world, is not the same claim as that which is made in Christianity.
Correct.
There's not a Pauline pattern of evidence in every religion of the world, is the point that I'm trying to make. And so it needs to be looked at differently, because the claim is far more audacious. It's not just we believe in God, and we believe that the right way to worship God is by submitting to him. It's, again, we have had a change of life
Yes. Yeah.
as a byproduct of having a relationship with Jesus that we gained access into upon believing and understanding the gospel. We have been sealed with the Holy Spirit. It all sounds crazy. If you're listening to this as a skeptic, he sounds crazy. But what I'm saying is look into it, because it's not,
Yes.
it's a shallow way of looking at religion to say that every religion claims the same thing. They do not claim the same thing. And the
Well,
more that I've studied religion, the more apparent that has become.
to your point, I mean, some of the statements we make, they sound like almost fluid. They sound very, but they're very easy to say. It's quite different in what the depth of when you go and analyze them and what they mean. As an example, like this 2:16 from Galatians. It's like, and I heard this recently in a pastor's message. Like, you can't earn your way, for example, into heaven. As an example, quickly, it's simple, right? It's like, this is why I talk about the Old Testament, where we got the kind of the rules that we were told to live by, and if you live by those, you can earn your way into heaven. And it's almost like Christ had to die on the cross to save us from those rules, in a sense, because it's such a powerful thing. And when, to your point about really thinking this through, you have to kind of do that, because you're starting to realize that there's nothing I can do to earn my way in here. I have to have faith. That doesn't mean that's easy, by the way, by any structure, but that faith in God through faith in Jesus through love is an enormous thing that gives you what you're saying with regards to that. Well, as a 6-year-old, you said the relief. It's an
Yes,
amazing thing to me.
it is. And when the word faith comes up, because it's one of many words that I sense has baggage to it
Yes,
that
true.
allows it to be misunderstood, I want to make a distinction here between faith and blind faith. And I want to
Yes.
make, and I think that John Lennox does a
Yes.
really great job of parsing that out, because he describes that he has faith in his wife, but that doesn't mean that there is a lack of evidence for his wife. It's a matter of placing his confidence in her, that she's
Mhm.
going to be who she says that she is, that she's basically worth his time, his attention, his loyalty. That's really what we mean by faith. It's placing our faith in Christ,
Mhm.
based on, like I said,
Evidence.
this while this in my mind, I have this massive tapestry that reveals the face of God, with maybe a million threads, woven up into it. And it's because of that we say, he is worthy. He is worthy of my
Oh,
time. He is worthy of my loyalty. I can think of no better. How did the hymn writer say it? Thou my best thought, by day or by night. And that's what it means to put your faith in him, when you recognize that your actual, how do I say this? Your actual thinking is invigorated by God through the power of the Holy Spirit, and it becomes more and more clear and obvious that this is the direction that you should go. Very
yeah.
much like, as you move closer to light, you can see not just the light more brightly, but everything else around you more clearly. And so that's the journey of faith. That's how the journey of faith goes. C.S. Lewis described this brilliantly at
Oh,
the
yeah.
end of The Great Divorce, where the mountains on the horizon represent where God is, heaven, basically. And as the protagonist moves closer to God, the environment becomes more real, and he realizes his insuitability for the environment. So, for example, he's walking, and suddenly the grass becomes like sharp daggers piercing against the flesh of the bottom of his foot. What's going on? You need to change. You're
Yes.
coming closer to truth. You're coming into the presence of I am. Why is that apple so heavy? It's more real. It's more, it's weightier, because God is weightier. You need to become stronger to be able to pick up the apple and eat it. And how truth is.
Oh,
It becomes more weighty the closer that you get to it. But faith is also required to keep stepping forward in
yes.
that. But I just want to be clear: it's not. I can't see. I can't see anything, and so faith. It's I can see,
Yes.
and so I'm going to put my faith in what I can see. And as you do that, you see more. Take the red pill and start to see the code.
Yes. Well, when you say about the seeing, this is the part that I think is such a struggle for us in our material existence. And that is we have this little thing that goes, seeing is believing. And we've had this forever. But if you actually get into the Bible, it almost is the opposite, right? And do you really need belief once you've seen it? Because it's one of those things that, well, now you have your phone, you've got it in your hand, you see it. Like, what's there to believe? It's there. But it's in Hebrews, it's in a couple places where it's being able to believe without seeing. And this is where the line, I think, is very sensitive by what we had, is the difference between this faith and blind faith. Because the blind faith gets us into trouble, right? It's not it doesn't have the evidence to support the faith that we're talking about, and I find that very intriguing. You mentioned C.S. Lewis, though, and you're obviously very I'll say knowledgeable on this sense. I've been doing a study of the Screw Tape Letters over the last couple of summers, and that has become, if not my favorite, one of my favorite books, because I find it just unbelievable what he has written in that book, um, as far as from the demon world
Mm-hmm.
and and how you continue, like you can read that book and in parts of it going, I agree with that. It's like in a sense a motivational statement, and then you have to check yourself because you say, but it's not quite right. And then you realize, well, that's because it's the demon's perspective. And
Right.
I find it's like when you mention The Great Divorce, there's so many of his works that I think are just, how do I say it? They're beyond what we normally consume in reading, I guess is the way I think of it. Like it's how he presents it.
Oh, C.S. Lewis is in my opinion, unparalleled in terms of his ability to communicate Christian truth, at least to a modern uh,
This
audience, in a way that actually makes sense in light of science, philosophy, etc. Can I go back for a second to
for
this question of
sure.
faith? Because I want to give, I've realized I'm speaking a little bit too general. I want to drill down and give one example. I'm talking about all these threads that create the tapestry. Can I just give one example
I
here?
want you to, because I think it's an important point, as you just said, and I think this whole blind faith, because it gets used too lightly to me. So yes, absolutely.
Okay, so here is my premise: is everyone has faith, everyone worships. It's only a question of what are you putting your faith in, and
Good.
is that
Yeah.
valid? Is it a good thing to put your faith in?
Yep.
What are you worshiping? Is it a good thing to worship? And so it's not a matter of Christians have faith and worship, atheists don't have faith, don't worship. It's a matter of what are you having faith in? What are you worshiping? Here would be
Yes.
one example. Imagine you fill the entire observable universe that's roughly 93 billion light years across with grains of sand. That's already almost an incomprehensible
Yes, it is.
thing
That is
thing to
beyond.
imagine. But let's go further. Now, you label one specific grain of sand somewhere in this cosmic sandbox, one grain of sand. Now you're blindfolded, and now you're given a spaceship, and you're asked to randomly pick out the one grain of sand from the entire sandbox of the observable universe. The chance of picking that one labeled grain of sand on your first try, you only get one try to do this, is actually greater than 1 in 10 to the
Oh,
120th probability.
it's unfathomable.
and if anyone listening to this recognizes that probability, 1 in 10 to the 120th, that's the probability of the cosmological constant, which is basically, it's a little bit more complicated than this, but it's basically the rate at which the universe is expanding as it relates to the dark matter. And so the level of precision that I just described is actually slightly less than the expansion rate of the cosmological constant. So let's be clear. If it's not designed, if it's not intended, if it's not on purpose, if it's actually just chance, then let's be really clear here. If you're basically a materialist and an atheist, you're saying that that is what happened. And to me, I don't have that much faith. I just don't. I don't have that much faith.
You.
And I think it's a terrible. Yes. I also think it's a terrible direction to put your faith in, because it devalues your fellow man. And there's so many other implications of that view that are downstream from that I think are very negative and insufficient. And so, but that would just be one example of, here is a single thread of a million threads that to me clearly points in the direction of that the universe that we inhabit exists on purpose. There is an intention behind it. And that scenario of the universe expanding rapidly is itself downstream from the even more primary question of why is there something rather than nothing?
Yes.
Which I think is the ultimate sting in the tail. But so anyways, I just wanted to go to that. It's not a question of it's a question of where are you placing your faith? Where are you placing your worship? Are you putting your faith in ultimate reality himself, in which case he will never let you down? Yeah. Or are you putting your faith in some other thing? So anyways, I'll leave it at that, but I wanted to drill down into just one example from a scientific
because we could talk about this for so long. There's just so many examples in what you've just described to me that kind of fit into that whole, like, if you just go, again, I'll go back to the science world and the second law of thermodynamics, right? And the whole idea that as time goes on, things become more disorderly. Like that's not imagined. That's not like that. That's been demonstrated for, I think, over a century now in science, that's what's happened. So if that's the case, how does all that goes on around us, like whether it's the trees that are growing outside, we have nothing to do with the trees and the plants, right? We had photosynthesis. We don't know how that, we know what it is. We don't know why it came. We don't know, like, really, like why it's there. You go into the cosmos itself, as you mentioned, the gravity, the four fundamental forces. So your example there to me is just, we're a worshiping species, as you said, right?
Yes.
We're going to worship something. And
exactly.
So I think to me, that's very cool.
No, absolutely. And I'm sorry if I talked over you. I think there was a slight delay on the Wi-Fi or whatever. But no, I think I agree with you totally. And I think it was St. Augustine who talked about that he described it like we have a pump, a love generating pump inside of our hearts that can't be turned off, even by the devil himself. You brought up screw tape, and yes, even by intelligent evil. We can't stop loving, worshiping, giving, putting our faith in something. It can't be turned off. All that it can do is be misdirected. Satan can't create anything. He can only pervert what God has created. That's why all of the vices are symmetrically antithetical to the virtues, because the devil can only distract us, point our love in the wrong direction, have us worship things that actually make us a slave to them, rather than being a slave to Christ, who's the one master that sets us free. That's
such
the
an
whole
point. Yeah, such an important point. The setting free part, Brandon, to me is like that's how I mean, C.S. Lewis again said, I think this too, kind of reiterating your C.S. Lewis comments around, you cannot be fulfilled otherwise. in this material existence. And it's like when you've gone through the experience, like you get the new car, but that new car lasts about 2 weeks before it becomes the old car, and now we need what's next, right? And
Right.
I think you see us in our technology today. So many we got to get the new iPhone. It's like, but the phone you're using works just fine, doesn't it? Like, it's
Yes.
we just need to do that. But going on from there, and I don't want to miss this because this is where we talked about the new book that Justin Brierley wrote, and I think this is very much in connection with what we're talking about, and the idea of, shall we say, belief. And his book is, I think, something to the effect of the surprising growth or rise in belief. And I keep
Yeah.
hearing around
Rebirth.
me, yes, rebirth. I keep hearing around me this where people are going elsewhere, like Christians are being are leaving the faith and things like that. And I'm not necessarily seeing that experience. To me, your podcast is a perfect example of this, and growing. And I mean, part of the reason why I stepped into this array, because it's like, having gone down the science world, it tells us things, but it doesn't tell us why. It doesn't give us the answer we're really looking for. Not that we're even going to find it. I mean, you go to Galatians 4:7, the peace of God surpasses all understanding. But it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't stop us in the pursuit. And that's why I said with his new book, have you been able to glean anything from that is supporting this idea? Oh, I'm sure you have, but it's just like, what is different? You're getting some leading figures in our society. You've mentioned John Lennox already. You've mentioned Jordan Peterson already. And I mean, you mentioned just St. Augustine. What do you think's happening? Like, I mean, I know media is almost the next to God is almost the most important, or not important, but the powerful force that we have behind us. I often find it really difficult that how we actually live, if we go to the boots in the ground, and what the media tells us how we're living, are not the same at all. But yet
Yeah.
we keep believing this media machine, right? And so, what do you like? What have you been able to get from Justin's book? That's kind of like, okay, this is what's going on. Like, and we're not being told this, or we're not understanding it in the correct way. Like, not putting words in your mouth, but I find it
Yeah.
fascinating that we're in this mode right now that's happening.
Let me try to answer your question by connecting, by following a thread from Tim Keller
Ah,
through this book by Hugh Ross. And I want to read a quote here because you brought up this book a second ago. And then I'll bring it full circle to the surprising rebirth of belief in God. So Tim Keller, I think it's one of the best ways I've heard anyone explain it, describes that America, and probably also Canada, and really the global North, the modern
yes,
West, however
yes,
you want to put it,
yes,
a post-enlightenment world has been inoculated with Christianity. We've been given a dosage of it that we think, for many people, think was the real thing, think was the genuine article. And now there's almost an immunity to the real thing, like how inoculation works. G.K. Chesterton
yes,
actually talked about that, we think it's been tried and found wanting, but it hasn't really been tried by a great many people. And so I think that that's one of the biggest things that we're up against, is trying to do, and that's what I'm even trying to say in this conversation, is we're not just saying, I am not saying I'm raised Christian, therefore I'm Christian. My parents were
yes,
Christian, therefore I'm Christian. I
yes,
am saying that I have had an individualized experience of God that is now undeniable. The farther, like I said, the closer you get to light, the brighter it gets, and the more you can see other things by it. It is now undeniable. I can't go back. I'm in too deep,
yes.
and so but that is what we're saying. And so I'm always trying to create that distinction, just because I think that in a lot of people's framework is the idea that it's basically
Already
people talk
set
about.
in you.
Right. Like there's if a rhino is a Republican in name only, then like a Sino is a Christian in name only. And there's like a lot of
Huh?
cultural nominal Christianity that exists. And I'm not even, if that's where you're at, I'm not even judging that per se. I mean, it's it's not a bad thing to be raised in a Christian house.
No, no, no.
But the point is that every person is ultimately living out their own experience, and ultimately it doesn't really matter what mom and dad believed. The only thing that really matters is what do you believe.
It's a
And
personal
so
thing.
exactly. And so I think that that's what one of the big things that we're up against. I think that to again I'm trying to follow the path that I said I was going to follow here. So let me go to Hugh Ross. He
Yes.
says that there's this curiosity that inspires exploration, and it suggests that human motivation to seek answers to questions, big or small, may sometimes even be stronger than the powerful drive for self-preservation itself. So he says that we're not primarily a species that is obsessed with just surviving and self-preservation. We clearly put our life on the line all the time to grow in knowledge and to satiate our spiritual and scientific curiosities. He describes playing with a hornet's nest and risking the sting in order to figure out how that all works inside.
Right.
What's
Right.
inside? How do they make, what's inside of the he describes burning his finger, trying to understand, the nature of fire, and all these different things. And that is the human story. I mean, why go to the moon? Going to the
Right.
moon is very risky. Why are we doing that? And it didn't always work out good. It's because we have a conquest. It's baked into our DNA, our spiritual DNA. We want to create,
Interesting.
learn,
Yeah.
seek. It's who we are as humans.
It's
And
really
so,
core actually to us, the humanity perspective of us, right? Like this is where
right,
it kind of breaks with, again, survival of the fittest coming out of the evolutionary perspective, right? That's opposing that directly. And we know it is. Why do you climb a mountain? Like it's the same. It's dangerous. It's unsafe. So go on, because I think this is very very revealing.
I think this is why New Atheism failed in a nutshell, is because it attempted to answer the how questions and ultimately failed at that. Like I mentioned just one example of why,
Right.
but
Right.
it doesn't, describing the mechanism of how something works is just ultimately reductionistic. If that's your
Yep.
only way of it, I mean, John Lennox again says this so well, where he says, why is the water boiling? Well, because the
Yes.
molecules are being
Yep.
agitated. They're raised to 212 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's all fine. You've described the mechanistic answer, the
Yes.
how answer, but you haven't answered the question that it was because I wanted a cup of tea,
Yes. Yes.
and that
Yes.
and that is a additional valid, non-competing
Yep.
great answer to the same question. And we basically need both. We need why and how to have a complete answer to questions. And so Hugh Ross here, and I think it's chapter 1 of this book, says why ask why questions.
Yeah.
And the answer is because that's what we do. We always have done it. We always will do it. We will ask why questions. I think that's why New Atheism failed, because it failed at answering the why questions. And
Yeah.
ultimately, just telling people the mechanisms of reality that doesn't satiate the spiritual longing inside of people. So then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, we do get caught up in that though, Brandon, very easily it seems. Like when we can understand how the internal combustion engine works, we're kind of like, oh, so now we know. And it's almost like, well, I know how today it's becoming the electrical induction motor, but it's like I know how the internal combustion engine works, so I can drive better than a person who doesn't. And it's like there's no connection actually to those two things at all. But yet we kind of have this sense about us that, well, we understand how that is, but we're not able to expand that further. So we don't know why. Like we kind of like, well, we know photosynthesis. I was mentioning the plant example before, but we have no clue why it's here, why it does it. And we water it, we might feed it, but we don't grow it. Like, I mean, it's just, to me, those are like amazing. This was just mentioned in 1 Corinthians that we're studying now about like one waters and one, but God grows it. And we had nothing to do with it. Like, it's just stunning to me that we're able to fool ourselves into this belief that because we're the most intelligent species, so to speak, the future of where we're going is in our hands. Like, that's just, to me, like, we had nothing to do with coming here in the first place, but yet we're going to control where we're going.
Yes. Yeah. And you mentioned,
Beautiful, man.
you were talking about AI earlier and
Yes.
basically like, consciousness, sentience, all of that. And as I'm sure you're aware, there's a growing movement in neuroscience and now like a subset of it, neurotheology, which attempts to explain literally everything on mechanistic terms, and it believes that if you can see a part of the brain lighting up when someone's dreaming, then that thing that's lighting
Yes.
up is synonymous with dreaming or memory or the part of the brain that lights up when you're feeling love. And to me, this is one of the silliest things that
Oh
I
my goodness.
that highlights the problem. And here's an analogy that I've thought of, or I guess a simile. Looking at the brain's activation as it experiences love and calling that activation love itself is as foolish as looking at tracks in the snow and thinking that that's the same thing as the great grizzly bear that brought them there. It's the same problem. You're seeing
Yes,
the
it is.
imprint
Yeah.
of something and mistaking it for the thing itself. Consciousness is a grizzly bear. And its effects are mapped
Yep.
into the observable brain
Amazing.
like tracks in the snow.
I've not thought of it that way before. That's very intriguing because it's like, yeah, it's like we do this though. Like we see those tracks, and you just said that's not the same as the bear. But there's something inside us that tricks us about that. Interesting.
Exactly. And there's so many examples of this, anyways. So, but let me go. So that's why I think new atheism failed. And to get back to Justin Brierley's book here. And let me say this too. If people want to read this book, we're reading this inside of the online community that I started called the Wisdom Society. And we're going to have Dr. Hugh Ross join us on December 6th.
Oh yes, for sure. Put that out. Yes,
In a
yes.
Q&A. So little shout out to that. If anyone wants to join the reading and
Brandon, can you
actually
just
ask.
can you repeat that? Because I think that's a big deal. Do that
Yeah.
again.
So Hugh Ross is going to be joining us on December 6th inside of the Wisdom Society to answer questions about this book.
Oh
It's a
wow.
Q&A. That's what we've been doing. We have basically a monthly book club where we read the book and then we talk to the author and they answer questions. And sometimes it gets a little combative. What did you mean on page 37? So it's good though. It's really good. So anyways, but I wanted to go back to Justin
Yes.
Brierley here. He basically describes that the modern West is now doubly disillusioned. They're disillusioned with God at a certain level post 9/11, all of that, and that allowed for the rise of new atheism. But now they're kind of disillusioned with the hollowness of materialism and
Yes.
spiritual openness because we, again, are a why asking species. We are a worshiping species, a faith-filled species. So the how only approach is failing. But
Yes.
the question then is what is going to replace it that
Yeah.
allows for why questions to be answered. And this is something that I can see as I have friends who have kind of been on a journey of deconstruction, and some of that I think is good. It depends on what's being deconstructed and what's being reconstructed. But I think that ultimately, the thing that people believe has to be able to speak into the breadth of the human experience is the bottom line. So, there's a weird reality that I see right now in the West where people are far more open to play around, for example, with a Ouija board than to pray.
Yes.
but both are, ways of connecting with something above and beyond
Beyond us.
ourselves.
Yes. Yes.
Why does one sound like a laborious, boring chore, and why does the other sound like a really fun Friday night? Let's have some drinks and play around with a Ouija board.
Yeah.
And I think
Interesting.
that kind of describes how the baggage, I think, of some
That's
of the
the
baggage
word.
that people have
Yeah. Yep.
interact can kind of deter people from being willing to kind of go further in this direction, because they feel like it's going in a circle. I was already there, and now I don't want to go back there. I want to go somewhere new. Let's play with the Ouija board instead of pray. And so, or let's do psychedelic
Yes.
drugs
Yes. And reach out.
to connect with the spiritual world, which might work, but you're coming in through the back door, and buckle your
Yes.
seatbelt, because that's
Buckle your seatbelt probably is a great expression for that
yeah,
particular route.
yes.
But it's interesting you say, because I think a lot of times we're looking for something new because we've been let down. Like we're this whole concept. If you pray for this, you'll be given all that your dreams. You'll be given all your dreams, and then when our dreams don't turn out as we anticipate them,
Yeah.
we've been let down, right? And this is kind of where I kind of go back to what we'd said originally, and that is around, we had nothing to do with coming into this world. And like, where is it that switches inside us to think now we're in control? Like, do you know what I mean? Like in that sense, and all that with the names that you've mentioned here, from Lennox, Dr. John Lennox, you've talked about Hugh Ross, we've talked about C.S. Lewis, all of those people with their Jordan Peterson, with their gigantic intellects, have come to this point are telling us maybe we've overlooked something that we should be looking at again, that's probably more important than where we were at. And that we're not. This is why I come back to the power of, well, I'll call it the gospel, the power of the Bible. Like, it's infinite, but it seems like every verse is infinite, like how you interpret them and how you bring them about. And so, to your point, in that sense, what you're seeing, like you said, why are we interested in a Ouija board on a Friday night versus going to prayer against the Bible? Like, there's a lot there that we need to overcome, but it's like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I also think that I briefly alluded to it earlier, but the recognition that we are in a moral universe, and that as much as we can see that clearly in our look outward into the world through the news, through the hospital system, etc., we can see that there is a brokenness in this
Yes.
world. That part's easy. What's a lot more difficult is admitting our contribution to it. That's the rub. There's a problem of
Yes.
evil, and
Yeah.
I am a part of it. That's the hard part. And that's the part, though, where ultimately, the idea of spiritual seeking in a total, like the example I gave, prayer or Ouija board. I don't know. I just want to feel something. I just want to touch the great beyond. Maybe I'll join a cult. Maybe I'll do a drug. Maybe I'll, research aliens late at night on YouTube. You want to know if there's something more. Fair enough. Like I said, that's part of being a human. But where I think things come into more focus is when it's not just, is there something out there, man? Just sort of broad, generic curiosity. But is the something out there capable of addressing the desperate need that the individual has to be made whole? Simply put.
Yes.
And if the person doesn't yet hasn't yet faced the shallowness of any other ground upon which you can stand besides Christ, who is the solid rock. The shakiness of that ground. If you haven't come to a place in your life yet where you're actually facing your need for forgiveness, or your just lack of wholeness. I don't know how else to say it, but I've noticed that celebrities get to the top of the pyramid and they jump off because from that vantage point, they realize that it was all an illusion.
Right.
I think a lot of people are still chasing something that they think if they get it, it will give them what they're looking for in life. And it's the people who have gotten everything that they wanted that jump off the top of the pyramid because they realize money, fame, infinite women, etc., doesn't actually satisfy your soul.
Yep.
Only God can satisfy your soul because you were meant to run on him. We were literally made to run on him. He's the only fountain that we can drink from and not be thirsty again. He is the living water. That's what people don't realize. And you don't wake up, you don't face that reality every day of your life. You have to have things go on in your life that contend with your own foolishness, selfishness, sinfulness. I've faced this in the past 2 months with a newborn kid. I'm serious. Realizing,
absolutely. Oh, for sure.
So all I need is a little bit of sleep deprivation and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And all of a sudden here I am facing the monster in me again. And guess what? I have to run to Jesus because like I said, there's nothing else out there that actually gives you forgiveness for your BS, but also power to overcome.
Yeah.
He's the only one that offers us a victory.
This is where you mentioned the C.S. Lewis. And I mean, I think in his work, he's quoted a few times where he says, if you want fulfillment in this life, you cannot find it in the material sense of it. And I think that it's, here's an individual. It's hard to even look at it because he came into this game as an atheist, he said. And so seeing that, already having that kind of a strong belief, it's kind of stunning of how we miss this. And I think part of this, Brandon, or a big part of it is because of what we listen to and what we see and what's around us. I mean, now we carry it in our pockets all day long. And it's constantly reaffirming the things that we have in our head because that's what we do on the phone, right? And I'm actually hopeful that, well, first of all, programs like yours, the Daily Dose of Wisdom, are giving and demonstrating. The popularity of it is demonstrating that people need this. They need to listen to it. The guests that you are having and talking to, the books that you've talked about even in this podcast, to me, sign me up. And I think others will probably see the passion in what you're saying and saying, like, we need to give this a try. Like, again, if we've been disillusioned by it, because there's just so much around us now, right? I mean, we live in this Western world of abundance. Like, what do you want for? Well, we always want for more because we get something in that. And it's like, but we're still not happy. What's missing, right? And I'm astounded when you said, you were 6 years old and you started to find this. Then you were at 19. And I think it comes at the most mysterious times in your life. Like, I'm kind of a latecomer to that. And I just, like, today, I just can't get enough. Like, it's just, I'm blown away by the illusion. I loved how you said that, because the illusion of what it is. And you get to that point where these new things that you think you had to have and you needed, and all of us still like that stuff. Like, it's a weird thing, right? Like, of course we like this new shiny stuff, but you realize that it's not. I guess somewhere along you get this is the conversion you were talking about with Paul, right?
Yeah.
We all go through this, and you realize this.
This is another one of the things that's so profound about the Bible, is that even if you go, like you said, way back to some of the oldest writings in the Old Testament, the predictive power about what people are like and the whole paradigm that's presented of idol worship
Oh,
is what we're talking about. It's the
absolutely.
same thing. It's making a secondary thing the primary thing, and it destroys you. That's what the entire Old Testament says. And Jordan Peterson has picked up on this, is you have to have something at the top of the hierarchy of values. If it's anything other than what is actually the most valuable, it won't work out great for you.
No.
And God, I mean, it is a lot more than that, but is definitely at the top of the hierarchy of values. That's for sure. He's the creator of all
Oh,
values, and the author of life itself. But he, that's what it is. Idolatry. It's not like, oh, God's not intimidated by some rock figure. It's a matter of your heart. It's
yep.
God's love for humanity that motivates him to tell us not to worship idols and not to put our faith in silly philosophies and not to give our hearts to foolish things. It's God's love that tells us to worship him because he knows that he is ultimate reality and he's the only one who can satisfy our souls. It's not some selfish
No.
motivation that he has. It's because, I mean, creation itself, love creates. God is love.
Yep.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the world. It is the love of God that causes him to want to share his good self with another. And humanity is this rare, unique part of the entire vast cosmos
Oh, yeah.
that is capable of understanding and participating in a union with the creator. That's the whole thing. That's my passion, is with when I'm going to do a lot more conversations with people on the college campus. I want to talk to college students because that's where ideas
Yes. That,
begin and go out in
absolutely.
culture. And I want to talk to college students about how cool is it that we can actually fellowship with and dine with and converse with the creator
Yes.
of the heavens and the earth. Let's talk about that, man, because I'm telling you,
Yep.
I'm so bored. I'm so bored, honestly, with the idea that you are and I am only material, and this whole thing
Yeah.
is God real conversation. I'm honestly getting to a point where I'm almost bored with it. I'm willing to labor in there as long as it is fruitful, but I would way rather talk about how to connect our lives to
Oh,
the
yeah.
creator of the universe and how to grow in knowledge of the creator of the universe. And like I said, as you get closer to light, the light becomes brighter and everything else becomes more clear. That's a way more
I love that picture.
worthwhile project
Yes.
for your life than circling the is God real conversation endlessly in order to basically prop up your own selfish desires, which will literally leave you unsatisfied. Look at Philip Seymour Hoffman, look at Robin Williams, look at
Oh, yeah. Oh,
the
my
amount of
goodness.
people that have got to the top of the pyramid and jumped off, is all I'm saying.
It's stunning. What's really too amazing that we kind of forget is that of all the animals, all the life that is created in this existence we are the only one that he created in his image.
Yeah.
Like, this comes back to the Hugh Ross thing, and like it created it for us. I know we've got to get close to wrapping up here,
Yeah.
Brandon, because this is awesome. Any final thoughts? So many of the things that you said are just. I think the college campuses is an incredible idea to be going to. I mean, somebody's got to get to that part of it. But anything else you'd like to finalize with this discussion that's been incredible to me?
No, I've really enjoyed it as well. I we could go on for hours, you know. So
We
we
will.
have to. Yeah, we will. Yeah, we have to land the plane somewhere. I guess my last thoughts. Well, you know what? Let me read something really quick here that I've written. I was actually looking for something else, and then this popped up here. So maybe I'm meant
Cool.
to read this. This will take
Yes.
30 seconds, but it's something that I've written to both try to share what I believe and also try to share by contrast a little bit what I don't believe. So here is what it says. I don't believe in God. Not that one. Not the God at the center of much atheist discussion, so cold and anonymous. I believe in the God who gave us his name, the one who entered into our story as quietly as snow falling on Christmas. Emmanuel, God with us. the one who went on to say, "Come unto me, all ye who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And I am the way, the truth, and the life. The one who forgives sins and keeps promises and never gives up. The one who offers eternal life because he's the only one who has defeated death. The one who will wipe away every tear and will make all bad things come untrue. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Peter, James, and John, the shepherd and the lamb, and the wind and the pasture, the Father, the Son, the Spirit. I believe in that God. And I say that just as, again, a way of showing distinction between this almost senselessly broad idea of some kind of God somewhere out there. That's the God who's captured my heart. And that's why.
Brandon, that was beautiful. What a great way to end. Thank you so much. Again, check out Brandon McGuire's show on YouTube and his podcast, A Daily Dose of Wisdom. I hope to have you back again, Brandon. What a wonderful discussion we've had today, and I thank you very much. I hope you'll tune back into Better Than Not again and listen to what we have, what's to be said. And I thank you again, Brandon McGuire. Daily Dose of Wisdom. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Are we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not.